To survive, Bear had borrowed heavily to invest in toxic assets and other high-risk securities. To survive, it would have to find more lenders willing to loan it money.
Bear Stearns rolls over his loans every night or every few nights in what's known as the repo market, and that gives its lenders an opportunity each night, if they want to call in some of their loans or to demand more collateral. What this amounts to effectively is that investment banks, there's a vote of confidence every night on whether they survive or not.
And that night, the markets were voting no confidence in Bear Stearns. Their stock was dropping, and the cash reserves were beginning to dwindle.
This stuff became a self-fulfilling prophecy. A lot of people that perhaps would not have acted in listening to some of the things that were going on said, I can't leave my assets there anymore and I have to take them out.
You're sitting in the middle of an avalanche. What can you do if you're on the side of a mountain and an avalanche comes at you? Now, an avalanche goes, 60 miles an hour? You can't outrun it, right? So, what can you do?
The story has continued to mushroom. There are concerns amongst perhaps some foreign
On
banks.
Thursday, Bear's stock continued to fall, and the reserve was almost completely gone.
By 6 o'clock, it's very clear that they do not have enough money to open the next day. They have 12 to 14 hours to do something unprecedented in terms of raising emergency capital or go on.
They had one last chance. The Federal Reserve Bank in New York. Tim Geithner was in charge.
Geithner is a Larry Summers protege from Treasury. He worked his way up during the Summers years at Treasury.
He's 47 years old. He looks like he's about 32. Universally liked and respected.
Extremely smart, extremely aware of the stuff. Very discreet, controlled.
And he sort of serves as an intermediary between Washington and Wall Street because he sits in Manhattan, but he works for the Federal Reserve System.
That night, Bear Stearns' fate would be in Tim Geithner's hands.
Geithner's people went to Bear's headquarters and started to look through all the accounts. Geithner told me he initially thought that they should let Bear go under.
By midnight, by 1, 2 in the morning, everybody and their mother has teams at Bear. Morgan, the Fed, the SEC, and they find out Bear is stuffed to the gills with toxic waste.
They found billions in hidden subprime mortgage loans. And something worse. Credit default swaps, a form of insurance. Bear had promised if bonds it insured failed, they would pay.
They were really very mysterious instruments that only the sort of financial wizards understood. Credit default swap is basically just an agreement that I have with you where I sell you insurance on some bond you own. If the bond goes belly up, I promise to pay you. And as long as the bond doesn't go belly up, you pay me for selling you insurance.
Geithner's investigators told him that Bear had made credit default swap deals worth hundreds of billions of dollars all over Wall Street and around the world.
Through the night, things changed as the people in the Fed discovered the positions that Bear was in and discovered what would happen if they did go under.
Because Bear Stearns was so indebted to so many other people, their failure to repay their debts or pay their debts would cause a cascade of other failures.
Every single part of Wall Street at this point is plugged into another part of Wall Street. And if I go down, I can now drag down that guy, and if he goes down, he can drag down that guy, and he can drag down that guy, and this is a huge web that connects everyone in these completely unforeseen ways.
They then reported back to Geithner that, look, this is a lot more complicated than it appears.
Geithner saw what central bankers fear most: systemic risk. Bear was frighteningly interconnected with other banks up and down Wall Street. Geithner picked up a phone at 4 in the morning and called his boss at the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke.
Ben Bernanke is a highly, highly respected scholar, and not only a scholar of economics, but of the Great Depression.
If he weren't chairman of the Fed, he'd be top of the list of people you'd be going to for advice and understanding and all this stuff.
On this night, one of the Depression experts' darkest fears was being realized.
Ben Bernanke felt that the risk to the system, the financial system as a whole, would be too great if Bear Stearns were allowed to go bankrupt.
It was clear that this had to be contained. There was no doubt in his mind. He, more than anyone else, appreciated what would happen if it get out of control.
He was absolutely determined to be an activist Fed governor. That when the crisis came along, his Fed would throw every weapon it had at the problem.
But the Federal Reserve was prohibited from directly lending cash to Bear, an unregulated investment bank. Bernanke was prepared to get around the rules, and he did.
Very early in the morning, the Federal Reserve has a conference call. Ben Bernanke's on it, Tim Geithner's on it, among others.
They eventually came up with this idea of giving a loan to JP Morgan, which was Bear's clearing bank, and having JP Morgan pass on the cash to Bear, so indirectly lending to them via JP Morgan.
We have important news to share with you about Bear Stearns, a company that I've been reporting on all week. We interviewed the
It was about
CEO
8:30 that they announced the deal.
Let me share with you this press release that has just hit. The Federal Reserve Bank and JP Morgan Chase announced that they have agreed to provide secured funding to Bear Stearns as necessary.
Make no mistake, the Federal Reserve is bailing out Bear Stearns, and they're using JP Morgan as a conduit to do it.
But Bernanke's unprecedented plan almost immediately backfired.
Because Bear Stearns was the only one to get that treatment. Obviously, the Fed was sending a message. This is an institution that's about to fail. So to single them out, in a sense, was to virtually assign them to a death sentence.